Well, hello there, and welcome to the ValueArmor webinar. I'm Billy Burley of CourthouseUSA, and with me today is my friend and mass appraisal expert, Pat O'Connor. Today, I'll be discussing what ValueArmor is and why we created it, while Pat will take you behind the shield to discuss the model he created to support ValueArmor. So first off, let's take a look at the problem. Many appraisers feel big box stores are not playing fair. They utilize a biased approach known as the dark store sales method to reduce tax assessments, essentially using vacant stores as comps. So what's the result of that? The result is a major revenue loss to the tax roll, which dramatically decreases the level of service governments can provide. It takes away money from schools. It causes a whole host of problems when you don't get the tax base you're counting on. So here's just a couple headlines I grabbed. Dark store appeals costing local governments thousands. Dark store tax assessment practice hurts local government. And the loopholes throttle budgets. And these are just a few of the headlines. If you Google search on dark store theory, there's hundreds more, and they're coming from all over the country, and they increase daily. The solution we came up with is ValueArmor. We definitely feel it's your best defense for a fair value, and it utilizes an unbiased statistical model developed by Pat O'Connor. And a little bit about Pat. Pat is certainly a leader in mass appraisal and has been for over 30 years. He has been on both sides of the equation. He's been with local governments, in fact, the former chief assessor for New York City. And he's also been on the private side, consulting with many jurisdictions. He has authored and published just countless articles on the topic. And he's certainly recognized as a thought leader within the IAAO community. So how does ValueArmor work? What does it do? It expands the geographic area of data and market analysis to provide statistical support of estimates of market value. So essentially, we're providing statewide sales of commercial values. And when you expand the data you're looking at, typically you're going to get different results. Think of it this way. If I'm analyzing the weather and I'm looking at 6 months worth of data, my results can be different compared to analyzing 60 years worth of data. And so we're essentially doing the same thing. We're saying get out of the vacuum or the silo of your own county sales, because it's going to be limited data, and look at it from a statewide level while still being able to localize your values. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat O'Connor to take you behind the shield and look at the model in detail. Pat, the floor is yours.
We started with buildings that were populated, or we knew we had a lot of cases of sales and unsold properties, and we started with those over 10,000 square feet. And so the idea was to tackle the large, big box stores. And so in our model terms, we have designed this model so it would be understandable by appraisers and the public. And so we have, for total living area, it's basically the state of Florida's term for building size. And we have a dollar adjustment for that. And then all the other model terms are multiplicatives. And they have multipliers. We're using percentages. So the percentages are applied against the value arrived for the living area. And in some cases, and this is rather dangerous, but you can do it, we used to take extra variables that weren't significant in the model, and we wanted to make them stable or stabilize them, so we put them at the end of the model after we created a value. But that problem caused some values to be higher and lower than they should be. So now we find that some of the property characteristics can be that aren't significant in the regression model, which means they're not stable. we can make them stable by constraining them, or basically putting them into the formula as a percentage without putting any parameters in there to reflect the model. So it doesn't change during the model process. Then the other thing we did was we used several location adjustments, and many of the terms have multiple base values or base characteristics that are in the model. But under location, we used the location value response surface. And then we thought, well, we need to have something for the counties, the sort of rural counties that didn't have a lot of larger buildings. And so we thought that the residential median sale price would indicate the economic level in the community and could have a bearing on the relationship to the value of these commercial properties. So we took the commercial residential median sale price per county, and we divided that by the statewide residential median sale price. So it just gave us a location percentage. And you could think of it as in terms of, instead of having neighborhoods, we have a county-wide neighborhood. And then we also found that when we ran all this, we needed to develop a county-wide median reciprocal of the sale price. So what is that? So that's just a reverse of the sale price, where you're used to a ratio where the assessment is on the top and the sale price on the bottom. In this case, we divide the sale price by the last estimate of market value to come up with a ratio or reciprocal ratio for the properties. So what we want to show you is how good the model was for the statewide. So here's the quality statistics from the ValueArmor model. We did 4 models. I first started with 1 model. Then I tried to add a lot of census data information, and that didn't work very well. And finally, I ended up with 4 regression models, 1 for apartment, 1 for industrial, 1 for office, 1 for retail. So if we have 4 models, and you can see the number of sales that we use for each of these models on a statewide basis. The medians are all within the IAAO recommended area range. The weighted mean is also there. The price-weighted differential is not, but if you go to the final column, the price-weighted bias is in the first 3, and in the 4th one, it's not in the great range, but it's in the good range. It's not in the bad range yet. You have to go over 10% to be in the bad range. So one of the things I found is that in working with high or a wide range of valuation, the price-weighted differential seems to fall apart in terms of telling you the quality of the model and meeting the IAAO standards. On the coefficient dispersion, you can see there, we go to the next model. So we use 2,030 sales, and the median ratio is 101. The weighted mean is 0.987, and the price-weighted differential at the far end is 0.04. So we're all within the range. So the next slide is on the retail market value to sale price comparison. So this is the market estimate compared to sale price, and the market estimate used against the assessed value. And here we've dropped down from the retail model to the this is the Department of Revenue's use code. So we've combined the number and the name, and as you can see, the number of sales we had. So there's a lot of stores in 11, and there's a lot in the community shopping center. There's a lot of sales in both of those, and a smaller number of sales in some of the other categories. And so the third column is the ValueArmor to sale price. So that's our estimate of market value in comparison to sale price. You can see in all cases it's within the range of 95 to 110% as recommended by the IAAO, with a median of 105. And then you go to the assessor's value, or in Florida they call it a just value, compared to the ValueArmor value. And you can see that they're pretty low. And so originally we had a very big concern over this in terms of the quality of the values in Florida. Okay, so the next slide is going to be the retail model. So I didn't want to show you all 4 models. This is the retail model. And as you can see, it's total living area times $91.26. And we make percentage adjustments for everything else that we had that wasn't significant. So we had age, the Department of Revenue's use code percentages. The building number is actually the number of buildings on the property, and the improvement quality of the building, the construction class of the building, total square foot of. So this is a replacement for total square foot of building group 10. So what I've done is I took the range of square footage and went to the and got a 10 percentile of each of those, and then I used those to analyze the model and adjust for basically depreciation, and usually that's the adjustment curve that we get with total living area, but that didn't work out that well. But total square foot of living area group 10 did. So we have 10 adjustments for the size of the building. Then we also used months. In some of the other models we use quarters and the location adjustment. Next slide. Okay, so the next slide, whoop, there we go. The next slide is state of Florida, and the orange or the red, especially down by Miami-Dade area, shows the greatest value. We have also good values around Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, and Tallahassee. And then you see in the other sort of rural areas where they have very few sales, those are also low value commercial property or retail property. In this case, this is a retail slide. So one of the things we could do to increase the reliability is to add the sales that were below 10,000 square feet in the commercial industrial areas. We could also build a buffer. If you look at the pattern here, you see that a lot of the sales are along the coast, and as such, we could maybe pick up with a buffer on the coast. And when you start to think about it, in most places, having a view of the water, or sort of the higher rents, the higher retails, the higher offices and apartments and so forth are along the waterways. So it may be that a buffer around any sort of water feature will increase the value of the commercial property. I don't think it will do much for the industrial properties, but it will for the apartments, the retail, and the offices. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next slide is really just to show you the value range, and this is actually embedded in the state of Florida. So that stuff behind the chart here is the state of Florida and the response surface that we used there. So this gives us the count of the sales, the 2030 sales, and the minimum and maximum sale price, and also the estimate of market value. So we're pretty close on both of those. And this is one continuous model. This isn't a segmented model, except for the four categories of types of property. You notice that between the minimum and the median, we have basically a 10-fold increase. But then from the median to the maximum, we have almost a 40-fold increase in the value. So the concept that you have to stratify by value in order to get the best model is the old concept, and it's based on doing a straight line or additive or linear regression. Okay, next model, next slide. All right, so this is the 2030 sales, and we're looking at On the vertical is sale price 1, and on the horizontal is the estimate of market value as the date of sale. It's the DOS. One of the things you have to realize is that when you're running these things, the regression, especially the nonlinear feature, limits the size of the character, the number of characters in a variable name. This also comes across in the when you're using GIS and some of the pieces of GIS, it limits the variable name. But if you look at this, you can see the least squared line is that line from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and you can see that most of the dots or circles are clustered around that line, and so that shows the quality. You're not going to get a perfect relationship because there are a number of, maybe we don't have all the information we need to do the valuation, but also you've got buyers and sellers that are negotiating a sale, and they may have different negotiation skills, and so the value is going to fluctuate somewhat. All right, next slide. Okay, so what we did find, I found out about this about 2 weeks ago. Now, I started this thing last year, and I've asked people about it, but I didn't find out until about 2 weeks ago. So in Florida, they have, in their legislature wisdom, they came up with a reduction in commercial industrial properties. It's called criteria 1 and 8. And in Florida, they're permitted to take 15% off the sale price without any documentation. And then after the 15% reduction in the sale price in terms of valuation, they're allowed to document other reasons why the property value should be lower than 85%. So on a practical basis, the statewide level of assessment for each county should be 85%. And if we then look, and this is more of a fractional level assessment, some people assess at 30% or 35%. This, in the case of Florida, they do it 85%. So a range around that would be acceptable for the IAAO range of values would be 77% to 94%. Next slide. So this saved us a lot of embarrassment because since we're going to Florida to explain why their assessments are low. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Now, here we have again the 4 groups: apartments, industrial, office, and retail. The number of sale counts within that category leading up to the 2030. The third column is the ratio of the estimate of value to sale price. You can see we're very good there and within the IAAO range. And then the fourth column is the ratio of the assessed value, or in Florida, the just value, to estimate of value. So as we said, it was 77 was the low end. So 2 of the ranges here, office and industrial, are within the range and pretty close to 85%, which is what the target is. But the apartments and the retail are not, and there's a problem that needs to be looked at. Okay, next slide. So some people don't like to work with ratios, and some people like to work with values per square foot or units per value per unit. There we go. Okay, so we wanted to show the Florida use codes groups, actually, you know, the apartment, industrial, office, and retail, the number of sales, again, the price. So here's the price per square foot median in each of those categories. And I was surprised that retail is the most expensive in terms of price. Then also, the next column is the estimated market value square foot median. And so we pretty much track that in the first 3 categories of apartment, industrial, and office. and we're a little high on the retail, which we could see under the ratio study in the last slide. But if we look at the market value or assessed value per square foot, we get a much different story. And basically, given their 85% level and what they've been doing, they're losing about $20 a square foot per commercial office building or apartment or industrial or retail, and this is throughout the state now. So you're talking about millions and millions of dollars that are not on the assessment roll that could be if the state legislature and the property appraisers decide to put it there. Okay, so I don't usually do this, but I wanted to come up with some editorial notes to talk to you and to the people in Florida about at the conference. And I don't blame the property appraisers. You know, they follow the rules that are set up by the state. And we all have the same problem, and that's the tax attorneys. The tax attorneys are advocates for clients, so they're biased, and they're giving you biased information. And you have to understand that and then use it accordingly. And unfortunately, this is sort of cynical, but our fellow appraisers in the single property area have different, part of their scope of work is to come up with a purpose for the appraisal. And that's set up by the appraiser. So the single property appraisers, knowing the purpose of the appraisal, if it's going to a bank or a lender, they come up with an optimistic valuation. If it's going to an assessment office, they come up with a pessimistic valuation. And there's all kinds of ways to bias the value one way or the other to get the answer that you're looking for. And part of that is, professional opinion. Part of it is just how you slant the numbers. But you got to remember that what's being given to the assessor's office is pessimistic rent rolls and pessimistic net incomes. And so you can't use the optimistic cap rates that are being used in appraisals that are given to lenders. You have to create your own cap rate study if you're going to use the information you get from like appeals or from tax agents to give you a proper valuation. And you can do that and expand that area by using regression to take the sale prices you have and estimate a market value, and then estimate the income, take the incomes you have and estimate the income. And that expands the group of economic information that you have to value property. Also, we find that, which kind of worried me until I found out about the 85% rule, but you're looking at percentages in this study that are way below or considerably below market value. Unfortunately, we found out they could be below as much as down to 77% of the sale price and still be within the IAA recommendations given the state laws. But these are values for where they have known sale prices. So we took sales from 2 years before the valuation that we wanted to come up with and the valuation roll we had from the Department of Revenue, and you can see how much below those sale prices the values are. So how do these problems occur? Well, one is the tax attorneys that put values down. You have cases where the government officials tend to cater to voters, right? So if you get, on one hand the government needs the money, on the other hand the government officials want to lower the taxes to their voters and to the people in the community. So what happens is once you get behind, officials will say, well, don't catch up too fast, and we'll catch up when the values go down, when the market goes down. The problem is that when the market goes down, the government officials say, oh, no, you can't raise values because perception is that the market went down, so the market has to go down. So once you get behind, it's very hard to catch up. Then you have commercial appraisers who work for you on your staff. Some are getting kind of old and crotchety like me, and they get tired of fighting the fight, so they just lower the values, and property appraisers may not even know what's going on. So here's the problem. There's an unintended shift from high-value commercial property to residential properties. Now, in the case of Florida, there's that 15% drop in value for the commercial properties. Then there's the homesteads and the Save Our Homes. The Save Our Homes protects the Florida residents from seeing too big of an increase. So who pays the tax? Well, the snowbirds pay the tax. The people who have money they come from Canada and northern United States, and they want a house in Florida, so they're buying property, and they get stuck with the tax because they're not Florida people. Well, at some point, the snowbirds get wise and they say, the cost of owning a house in Florida is too much. I can't afford those taxes, so they don't go to Florida. They go to the Carolinas. And once you lose them, it's hard to get them back. So there's an unintended consequence of this tax burden shift that we have to all be careful of. So there's a number of uses for this valuation. So one of the things you can do is you can just use it as a test against your CAMA values or your CAMA system. And so if I'm working with a cost approach or a comparable sales approach, I can compare the numbers, the market values I'm getting before I send people to the field, and I can determine whether my cost approach, my comparable sales approach, my income approach is actually arriving at an acceptable market value. So ValueArmor can provide that independent valuation for you. One of the things we can do is check for the adjustments on the income approach. The problem is there's too many opinionated or appraiser professional opinions that can be built into the income approach, and it's very hard to find them. The only way to check is to use something like ValueArmor that will tell you whether your income approach is approximating market value or not. So then we also have on the other part of we must sort of skip one here. If you want to be able to defend your values, not only from the assessment from the taxpayers, but also from your commercial appraisers, you can use the ValueArmor tool or market value, which is a standardized market value, to compare it to what your appraisers are doing and see whether you've got appraisers who are undervaluing property against your orders as the property appraiser. And also you can defend against your commercial assessment. One of the problems you're seeing is that many, the federal courts come out with a rule saying that the comparable sales and the matched pairs is not really scientific enough, and they would like to see more regression. Now, you're not going to see that locally, but that's coming down the pike. And the idea of a three comparable approach to value is really just giving the person that reads the report some justification for what the appraiser's opinion is. It's not really giving him any scientific support for the valuation or statistical support. So one of the things you can do is you can take the that we have and the formulas that we have, because we've broken it down into just simply dollars and percentages, and use those to develop your comparable sales for your tax appeals. And you can also use this to triage some of your appeals. If you get a lot of appeals, you've got to try and figure out how you're going to identify the problems and make compromises where necessary. You can use these to do that. There's a lot of uses. There's a lot of uses for ValueArmor. We've talked mostly about the government side, and eventually we'll see more commercial AVMs in the private sector being used for loan portfolio reviews and for secondary mortgages on commercial properties and so forth, just as we're seeing it today in the residential side.
All right, great. That was a lot of great information, Pat. I hope that wasn't too much like drinking from a fire hose. I know I learned quite a bit there. Now I'm going to take over for a minute and just talk about ValueArmor specifically. and what it includes when we say ValueArmor. So we're looking at the data for statewide sales, and that comes in Excel format, as well as the estimated values, the values that come out of ValueArmor and Pat's model. So let's think of a giant Excel spreadsheet with all this data in it. There's a couple different tiers with different pricing levels, whether you get, if you want just the statewide sales to do what you want with, that's one tier, or if you want the statewide sales along with the ValueArmor values. And included in both of those is what you kind of see here, and I'm going to zoom in just a touch, is a GIS viewer. So this is a web-based viewer that I created using CourthouseUSA, and what you're looking at is a bunch of dots. These are all the sales that Pat's looked at. You'll see these small circles represent the property type. So whether it's apartment, industrial, office, or retail. And if you hover over those in the actual map, it gives you a little more detail on whether it's what type of retail it is or what type of office it is. It gets a little more granular on those codes. And then the large circles represent the ratio from ValueArmor. So just at a quick glance, I can see this dot up here. We're looking at an industrial that's on the low level of the ratios. There's another one. I can look at this here as an office on the high side of ratios. Here's retail on the high side of ratios. So I try to build a very easy to understand visualization. And I used to always say, I'll still say, I guess, the visualization is done right. You don't have to think a whole lot about it. You can look at something and get information immediately from it. Also with this map is if you were to click on one of these, it would pull up an info window that would give you all the details about each property. So it's a very user-friendly web-based system to use. When you get the data, you can either use the web-based CourthouseUSA viewer, or you can pop in your own GIS. It has all the latitude and longitude information, so you can pop in your own GIS if you have that and do with it what you need to. Additional services on top of that are things like a customized narrative report for a property that's done by Pat. And Pat also offers expert witness report and testimony and so on. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Pat, that last bullet, what you offer there.
Yeah. Since we don't really know what you as the clients are going to ask for, we're going to have to negotiate those separately for each case.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to put up our contact information. If you have any other questions as you go through and you process all this information, you'll have my email address. You can certainly send me an email with the questions, and chances are I'll send those to Pat and we'll get you a good answer for them. So my email is pretty easy. It's billy@CourthouseUSA.com. You can also reach out to Marlene, and a lot of you know Marlene. Marlene at CourthouseUSA.com. And then, of course, there's Pat's email, patmoc@swbell.net. That's how you reach out to us. And you can also find us on the web at CourthouseUSA.com. I would encourage you to go to our webpage and check out our app store. And there you'll see a variety of apps that we've built really just for you, the property appraisers, to make use of.